What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So I want to talk about Umar Nurmagomedov and his fight this weekend, because to me it's like a bit of a crossroads moment. And this video isn't just about him, it's also sort of a summary of the current landscape at bantamweight, or at least of the top 15 rankings. But looking at Umar specifically, it's a strange case because I can see two realities manifesting themselves depending on whether he wins or loses against Batista tomorrow. Now, on the one hand, like most people, myself included, kind of view Umar as the second best bantamweight in the world, as the heir apparent to Merab, as the guy who would be the champ if Merab wasn't in the way. And Umar is young, he's only 29, and Merab is starting to get old. I think he's turning 35 in like January or February, and Merab hasn't shown any signs of decline yet, but he has a style that probably will decline pretty quickly, meaning when you're a wrestler and a pace pusher like that, once you start getting old or once you start getting injured, you tend to fall off rather quickly. Just look at someone like Cain Velasquez. So hopefully Merab still has a few good defenses left in him, but he's not going to be around forever. Father Time is going to catch up to him, and that'll be what it is. Whereas Umar still has quite a lot of time left. And if he can beat Batista, he might get another title shot. If Merab beats Jan in the rematch, which he probably will, and if Umar can style on Batista, there ain't going to be much else. Maybe Pantoja comes up, maybe Merab goes up to featherweight, maybe, I don't know, they give it to Song Yadong or Figueiredo or something in a weird sort of, effort to just get some fresh blood in there. But I think realistically, they'll give it to Umar. Now, that's all well and good, but there's kind of two sides to that coin, because if we rewind the clock a little bit and look at the time when Umar got that shot against Merab in the first place, sure, I think he was the betting favorite. And yes, many people, myself included, were actually picking Umar to win. But there were also people questioning whether he deserved the title shot in the first place. Because yes, he was undefeated. Yes, he was looking good. Yes, he was on a decent win streak in the UFC. I think it was 6 fights, which isn't terrible. That's like the number of fights that McGregor had, the win streak McGregor had going into his fight with Aldo. But he only had the one good win. And it was a really good win. It was the win over Sandhagen. And to not only beat Sandhagen, but to beat him in the striking, in the grappling, to comfortably win 5 rounds against him like that and just look professional about it, that was very impressive. But it was kind of that win and nothing else. And it reminded me a bit of Islam Makhachev when he got his title shot against Charles Oliveira. Now, it's not a 1-to-1 comparison because Makhachev had the longer win streak. It was a 9 or 10 fight win streak. And unlike Umar's streak, it didn't have the one standout name. It had a couple of good names like Hooker and Green, one of which has aged very well and one of which has aged very poorly. But it was a similar case, though, where people were picking the challenger, Umar and Islam, to beat the champion, whilst at the same time questioning if he even deserved the shot in the first place. And since Umar has not fought since losing to Merab, that still means he hasn't fought the other top contenders. He hasn't fought Jan, he hasn't fought O'Malley. If we want to kind of count Song Yadong as the fringe contender there, he is kind of the gatekeeper to the top 5. He's aging out of being a kind of young up-and-comer and is now just becoming a journeyman. But he's legit, and he still hasn't fought him. Umar has not fought Song Yadong. So it puts Umar in a weird spot. Now, it's not entirely fair to, dog on Umar because he hasn't fought all those other guys, because those are really the only other people left for him to fight. Because the rest of the division is kind of old and weird right now. That's where I said at the start, this is a video about Umar, but also a video about bantamweight. Because outside of the top 5, it's just old dudes for the most part. It's Marlon Vera, who granted is not too old. He's 32, 33, but he's been fighting for 15 years. His first fight was in 2010, and he's just taken a lot of damage. He's clearly not having his best moment lately. He's on a losing streak. He's, it looks like he's starting to be on the way out here. Jose Aldo's retired, so he's not in the rankings anymore, but you've got guys like Figueiredo, you've got guys like Henry Cejudo, you've got guys like Rob Font, even some of the up-and-coming contenders like Ayman Zahabi, who's on, I think, a 7-fight win streak and, is doing well for himself. he's like 37. Like, he's not going to be around very long. Like, no one's looking at him as a clear title challenger. No one's looking at him as like a guy Umar needs to beat to prove himself. And so really, like, it feels appropriate for Umar to get a title shot, maybe win, and then the other contenders he hasn't fought, guys like O'Malley and Yan, seem more like natural defenses and less like people he needs to beat in order to earn the title shot. Because if he beats them first, like, what are we going to do then? You know, he's going to be in the same spot Merab is right now, where he's just already cleared out the division because the division is so top heavy. Now, that's sort of all looking at this on the one hand. That's sort of all looking at it from the point of view of, like, what happens if he beats Batista and gets a title shot and possibly wins. Because if he does that, you know, he could go on to be one of the great bantamweight champions. Because, again, he's young, he's 29. If he beats Batista and if Merab beats Yan, you know, he could be fighting Merab in, like, March of next year already. And if he wins, then he's got several years of his prime left in order to just rack up title defenses. And if he's as good as we think, and if he's good enough to beat Merab, he's probably going to do that. Which could mean, again, he goes down as one of the top bantamweights ever. You know, maybe even one of the pound-for-pound best fighters ever. And that's a very, you know, don't count your eggs before they hatch, but that's a very real possibility for him, especially if he can win on Saturday. But if he loses on Saturday, that becomes a very dicey proposition. In fact, I would say at that point, his career alters significantly. It's not career ending, but it's career altering. Because if he loses 2 in a row, that's bad by itself. You know, going from undefeated to losing 2 in a row, always a bad look. But to not only lose 2 in a row, but to have the second loss be against the number 9 guy. A guy who, yes, is an up-and-coming contender. Yes, is relatively young. He's like 32. Yes, is on a good streak. I think it's an 8-fight win streak for Batista. But a guy who is not particularly dangerous, gets a lot of decisions. A guy who's not really a specialist. You know, he's not overwhelmingly good in any one area. He's a bit of an all-rounder. He's just very competent. But perhaps most importantly, a guy who the fans hate. You know, Batista had a really boring fight with Aldo where he just held him against the fence. Many people believed he deserved to lose that decision. And it sort of ended, you know, Aldo's last, like, streak of wins. And then he went on to fight Patchy Mix, and sure, he beat him, but that fight wasn't amazing, and Mix looked like shit, and went on to lose his next fight. So, like, the fans are not high on Batista at the moment. I mean, you know, of course, MMA Guru famously has that, like, bounty on his head where he wants to award, I think it's like $10K to whoever knocks him out. Like, that's indicative of how the fans at large feel about him. And again, he's ranked low. He's ranked number 9. And he probably should be ranked higher. But to lose to that guy, you know, that doesn't mean Umar will never get a title shot, but it means, you know, now instead of being at most 1 fight away from getting a title shot, now he's going to be 2, 3, maybe even more fights away. And that's assuming he wins all 3 of those fights. And now, being 29 is not that young anymore, because that could easily take 1.5 years, maybe even 2 years. And now you're introducing more risk in terms of just bad luck. Now you're introducing more of a possibility that somewhere in that stretch of time you get a serious injury and that sidelines you for 9 months or something. And now, boom, all of a sudden you're not even sniffing a title shot until 31, 32, 33 years old. You know, like, it can really sideline you to have this kind of turnaround where you go from being perceived as the clear top contender to just some guy in the fucking back of the line. And again, that could still work. Like, he could lose to Batista, put together the wins, get his title shot, and still be young enough to, like, get a few defenses in. But now we're talking about, like, hoping you get the belt, hoping you get any defenses. And that doesn't add up to you having one of the best bantamweight careers of all time, to you going down as one of the pound-for-pound best fighters of all time. Which, again, like I said, is a real possibility if he can get past Batista and then beat Merab. You know? And who knows, like, he could even beat Batista, lose to Merab, but then get, like, a third fight with it. Like, so let's say the second fight is super close. and let's say other shit isn't lining up, but Pantoja loses, so he can't come up. Merab is just hell-bent on staying at bantamweight. He doesn't want to go up to 145. And now all of a sudden, boom. And let's say Merab finishes Peter Yan. So it's like he's finished Yan. He's finished O'Malley, beat both of them twice. He set the record for takedowns against fucking Corey, and Corey kind of didn't deserve the title shot anyway. Who knows? Maybe Corey loses to O'Malley in the meantime. Who knows what happens? And let's say Umar has two. Let's say the rematch between Umar and Merab is even more nip-tuck than the first one. Let's say it's like a split decision or something. They might just go to a third fight. It might be like a Holloway-Volkanovski situation. And if that happens, it might shift from a Holloway-Volkanovski situation into a Moreno-Figueiredo situation. Because Moreno got a draw with Figueiredo in the first fight. Most people thought Figueiredo should have won. Didn't think it should have been a draw. Then he beats Figueiredo in the rematch, loses to him in the third fight, beats him in the fourth fight. And you kind of saw Figueiredo age out over the course of those fights. If you watch him in the fourth fight versus the first fight, it's not the same guy. He's older, he's slower, he's getting tired more quickly. He's just not the same dude. And that could happen to Merab. Merab could, have two close fights with Umar and then get washed in the third one because that's finally when he's too fucking old. That's finally when he's starting to slow down. It could happen. And Umar would still be young and he'd still have time to go on and rack up defenses. And because this is how fans are, they might not see it as Merab aging out. They might just see it as, oh, Umar actually was the better man. So boom, he kind of absorbs a bit of Merab's legacy, a bit of his GOAT status, and then goes on to have his own string of defenses. And again, all of a sudden, being one of the top bantamweights of all time, being one of the top fighters of all time is very realistic. And that's, again, to go back to the very beginning, that's why this is a bit of a crossroads moment, because if he somehow loses to Batista, which I doubt he will, but if he does, by anything other than just horrible robbery, if he loses to him in any fashion, whether it's a decision or not, whether it's boring or not, whether it's vaguely competitive or not, that really changes his trajectory. That really shifts from, realistic GOAT potential to fingers crossed you ever hold a title kind of situation. And it's not the end of the world, and plenty of fighters have worse lots than that. But, like we talked about Ayman Zahabi, that guy is, his best hope is sniffing a title shot, and if he gets a title shot, probably losing it. If he somehow wins, probably not defending. So this isn't a pity party for Umar, but it is an interesting situation, and it's adding a layer of intrigue to a fight that's a solid fight. You can't have a top 5 and a top 10 bantamweight be on a fight card and not be excited. But again, people hate Batista. There's a good chance the fight's going to the distance. No one's picking it to be fight of the night. But when you look at it this way, when you consider that there's actual legacy at stake, there's actual GOAT potential at stake, and that's not even to speak to Batista. If Batista can beat Umar and prove he's legit, all of a sudden we've got a serious contender at bantamweight who most of us had not only overlooked but had collectively hated. And that's interesting in itself. So to me, this is a very solid fight on the card that's very much worth tuning into. I'm a lot more intrigued about this than I am for the co-main event. I'll say that much.